All righty. Well, good morning, everybody, and good afternoon, depending on where you're tuning in from. Welcome to the July SDEC session. My name is Julia Petrie from Search Discovery, and if you're a returning SDEC member, welcome back. And if it is your first time at a session, we're excited that you're here. So the Search Discovery education community offers webinars just like this on various topics like digital analytics, digital strategy, and so many more. We have loads of on-demand content from past webinars on our online library. So I will be sharing that link in the chat shortly. And if you have not done so yet, please make sure to join our email list so that you can get all of the latest updates on our upcoming webinars. So during today's session, if you have any questions for our guest speaker, Adam Greco, please make sure to place those in the chat and we'll get to those at the end. And as we're waiting, I am going to be launching a poll. And all right, so that poll is available for everybody to vote. And as we are waiting for everybody to join, please share your thoughts on today's topic. So with that, I am excited to introduce Adam Greco. He is a product evangelist from Amplitude, and today's topic, he's going to be sharing all about data warehouse native analytics. So we're excited to have him here online with us today. So with that, I will kick it off to you, Adam.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Julia. And hello, everyone. Welcome from sunny Amsterdam, where I am now living. And it's almost evening here, so almost the end of my day. I'm really excited to talk about this topic, and I promise this is not a sales pitch in any way. I was one of the people who helped get this SDEC thing off the ground when I worked at Search Discovery, and really excited that it's still going forward. But the concept of data warehouse native analytics is something that has been popping up over and over again, and it's kind of a new emerging trend. And I always like to research what's going on in our industry, and I've just been doing a ton of research on it. So I thought I would just kind of share it with you all because more people I talk to are not very familiar with this. It does have a lot of different names. Some people call it composable analytics, but I think the new term that most people are gravitating towards is data warehouse native analytics. So I'll do just a quick bio of who I am, and then maybe after that, we'll see the results of the poll to see how much you all know going in, so I know how fast or slow to go. So my name, again, is Adam Greco, and I'm a product evangelist at Amplitude. Many of you may have known me from my old career where I was one of the early employees at Omniture. I did a bunch around Adobe Analytics. I used to blog quite a bit, worked at Salesforce.com to head up analytics there, been part of lots of implementations, and I was fortunate enough to work at Search Discovery for a little bit, which was awesome. So I've been doing digital analytics for way longer than I'd like to admit, but really excited to be here. And I always try to encourage everyone to stay up to date on what is going on in our industry. So Julia, how are we doing on our poll before I dive in?
Yes, it looks like we almost have everybody participated in that poll, but we can go ahead and end it. And I will share those results. All right. Can you see those results?
Yeah, so it looks like about 37% have never heard of it. Only a couple are actively considering it. No one is using it yet, which is kind of what I expected. But we do have about half who are somewhat familiar, who've at least heard about it, which is perfect. So that's what I thought. It's much more exciting to be part of presentations that are new to you than stuff you already know. So I'm going to start from the beginning, since I know a lot of people are new to this, and kind of walk you through what this is. So what is data warehouse native analytics? So the way I like to always explain things is to put it in context of history. So if we go back in time, I'm probably older than most of you, but if you think about how we started in the analytics industry, when the internet first emerged, websites first came out, and people basically wanted to know what was happening on these websites that they were putting up. And I remember the early days when we did this with log files. And in general, what we would do is we would just track every click that people were making on our web page. A lot of this was PHP back at the time. And on our own web servers, we would just start logging things. And then tools like Web Trends came out and other NetGenesis and tools came out that allowed you to kind of take those log files and then start to put them into really rudimentary charts and graphs. But the key thing here was that the data was collected and it was stored on the server of the company. It was normally kind of connected to that web server. Now, shortly thereafter, what happened is that marketing teams basically said, listen, we want to understand everything that's happening on the website. We want to understand, are people coming to us from display ads, pop-up ads, paid search ads, and so on. And they didn't want to have to wait for IT to help them build reports off of these log files. And log files really just got pushed to the limit. And then a lot of people in marketing weren't super comfortable with tools like SQL, and they didn't know how to pull the data that they really wanted. And so what happened then is there was this revolution where someone came up with the idea of what if we used JavaScript, and what if we put a 1-by-1 invisible pixel on the web page, and on that pixel, we're just going to store a crap load of data, and we're going to be able to send that and collect it. But this was something that was really pioneered by analytics vendors, and all of those vendors had optimized servers. And so it was more of a SaaS model. So you would put this JavaScript on your site, and then the data would be sent to the vendor, and then they would help you process it, and they would help you create reports. And so that is what gave birth to the web analytics industry. And that's when you had Web Trends, Urchin, Website Story, Omniture, Site Catalyst, and so on. So the reason why most marketers use these tools is that the SaaS model was just much more scalable. And we used to joke and call this shadow marketing, where basically they didn't want to go to their IT folks and say, I need you to collect all this data and create reports and graphs for me. Vendors like Omniture, Web Trends, Websites, Hitbox, they all came out and said, hey, if you just send us the data, we'll make sure the reports run really quickly, and we'll be able to give you all of the pathing reports and data reports, content reports, everything you need. And they were really efficient and they were optimized for speed, but it was all in SaaS. It was all in the cloud. And Salesforce.com was kind of one of the leaders in getting people to go to SaaS. And so that architecture, the typical kind of SaaS architecture, was that you would collect the data. It would then be sent to a vendor through some sort of ingestion pipeline, usually JavaScript or an SDK. And then your analytics provider would help you to run all those reports. And then as the next decades happen, we started to realize that we have all of this data in the cloud, but we also need to be able to action on some of this data. And we want to take subsets of that data. And that started a new revolution that's like the CDP revolution, where you basically say, even though I'm sending data to the cloud to say like an Adobe or a Google, I also want to have that data internally. So what would happen is that people would basically, from their cloud provider, they would say, I'm going to take all my Adobe data, my Google data, and I'm also going to send it to a warehouse that we have internally. That could be Redshift. Nowadays, a lot of people are using Snowflake and so on, or GCP. And then that would have all of your web data, your mobile app data, and it would also have maybe call center data or store data if you have a brick and mortar store. So then what the CDP would do is say, we're going to take a subset of that data and put it into a CDP, like a Telium, lots of CDPs out there, Segment and Particle, and basically say, we're going to just give you some of the marketing data, and we're going to let you do some cohorts and send groups of users to different systems. So
What started really simple as a 1-by-1 pixel of just sending web data has now turned into web data, mobile app data, all of it going to a data warehouse mixed with your other customer data, some of it partitioned off into a CDP. And in many respects, the CDP has been kind of like a stopgap solution where you're basically saying, I just can't analyze all of the customer data I have, but there are a bunch of kind of marketing data that I want to be able to take action on, build cohorts of users on. And so CDPs have blown up in the last couple of years, and a lot of the data that goes into analytics products is also kind of commingled in CDP, but most CDPs are also SaaS. So that's just kind of a history of how we went from log files all the way into SaaS analytics products, and then also having a little bit of CDP in there. But now we're running into a weird situation. We're at an inflection point as an industry where after many years of kind of pretty calm waters, there's some big changes that are happening that are really shaking up both the digital analytics space and the CDP space. And I want to kind of cover some of the problems, and many of you kind of know these because you deal with this all the time. But the first one is privacy. So we're getting more and more pressure to not store data in the cloud about our customers, GDPR, CCPA. Basically, all of consumers are kind of revolting and saying, we don't want you to store all this information about us unless we give you permission. Also, the more data that you store in the cloud in a SaaS product, that introduces some security risk, because if that cloud provider gets hacked, then they could get some of your customer data. The other thing is that when you use a SaaS model, one of the things that you kind of give up on is that you aren't going to use your own data model. You have to adhere to the data model of that vendor. So if you're using Adobe, that might be in the old world EVARs and SPROPs. If you're using Google, it might be events and property dimensions and so on. So you have to kind of adhere to their data model, which is what they use to store your data and to optimize it. But nowadays, a lot of us want to see kind of more of an optimized view of the full customer journey. But if we're really honest with ourselves, in our digital analytics tools, it's really difficult to see a full customer journey because we only see normally data from website and mobile app. And if you want to see the full customer journey, you have to include things like the call center and include things like, all of your stores and all of your offline things. And I think a lot of people aren't really anxious to take all of their CRM data, their Salesforce data, their store data, their call center data, and send that into a digital analytics tool. That's just not really what they're really meant for. And so the data sent to these SaaS analytics vendors, what we see most companies doing is they're also syncing it or sending it into the data warehouse that they own. And if you do even try to pair some of that data, a lot of times that data could be out of sync. So for example, if you send data from Adobe Analytics and you send it into, say, Snowflake, if a new thing happens in Adobe Analytics, how do you keep that in sync with your warehouse? And then, as I mentioned, CDPs have been kind of a stopgap solution to basically say, we're going to just look at a portion of this. But a sample use case that would be really tricky to do in the digital analytics world would be something like this. As someone comes to you and say, I want to see which all of my marketing channels and campaigns that drove new customers to the website, but then I want to see of the people who came to the website, how many people browsed our product, switched over to the mobile app, and then after that, maybe they went to a physical store, they purchased the product, but then they went to the store and returned it, because ultimately I want to compute my true return on ad spend after the return and across all those multiple channels. So that would be pretty tricky, because the digital analytics product would track kind of the campaign, what happened in the app or the browser. The data warehouse would kind of determine, hey, do we know this person? Is this someone who we've seen before? We have our customer record in the data warehouse. But then the store data would have to be fed into the data warehouse and tied to that same customer. And then you'd have to do some identity resolution to determine if the web and app data is actually the same person who came to the store, maybe using like a loyalty card and so on. And then the product return data would have to be sent in as well and tied together. And while you could be really adventurous and say, you know what, I'm going to try to send all of this into my digital analytics provider like a Google, Adobe, or our company Amplitude, it would usually be pretty expensive, pretty difficult to do. And this is really what data warehouses are for. Shove all the crap you have into the data warehouse and let it all kind of go together and try to do the identity resolution and try to correlate all that. So that's really where we've been, is we've got all of this data that digital analytics tools don't have access to. But what if you no longer needed to send all of the behavioral data, all those clicks and swipes that you're currently sending to your digital analytics provider? And what if you didn't have to send that to them? What if you didn't have to send it to their SaaS cloud? And what if you didn't have to send it to a separate data store? What if you could use the data warehouse, and if the speed of data warehouses got so good that you could take all of the clickstream data from your mobile app and your website, send it to your warehouse and merge it with all of your other customer data and do reporting all in real time and using all the data points that you have. And that's basically what data warehouse native analytics is. So the idea behind data warehouse native analytics is that ultimately in the future, you'll have products that allow analysts to basically build reports, dashboards, conversion funnels, path reports, all cohorts, all the stuff you know and love from tools like Adobe, Google, Amplitude, but do it directly on the data warehouse, whether that's Snowflake, Databricks, GCP, Redshift, and basically never have to send any data to a SaaS analytics product, which I know sounds kind of crazy because that's what we've been doing for the last 20 years, but that's why this is kind of a new emerging trend. So the idea behind data warehouse analytics is weird because it's almost like BI. Business intelligence tools have always been very much like that, where they just sit on top of a data warehouse. And many of us are comfortable with kind of Tableau or Looker. But we've always said to ourselves, well, how could you do a conversion funnel? How could you do a path report? All the reports we do in digital analytics are a little more sophisticated, a little more complex. How could we do that? But we're starting to see that that is now possible because the data warehouses are getting so advanced and so complex. So a new diagram in terms of architecture might be that someone is now collecting data, and you could do your own data collection. You could use something like Snowplow or something like that, and basically just send all that data into the data warehouse like a Snowflake. And then you just run the reports right there, right from your digital analytics tool. Now, the advantages of this approach are pretty amazing. First of all, you don't have any GDPR issues because technically you're not really sending any data to like an Adobe, a Google, or an Amplitude. So you don't have to worry about those vendors being GDPR compliant. You're basically just collecting the data and sending it into your data warehouse. The next thing is that you don't have to worry about security because you don't have to worry about Adobe or Google being hacked and someone getting your data because none of your data is in Adobe, Google, or Amplitude. It's just not there. It's just one less place to get hacked. And in many respects, there really isn't an implementation. Now, there may be some data points that you don't already have in your data warehouse that you want to add. So you might have to add new things to your data collection stream, but you really significantly reduce the amount of implementation you need. And if you already have the data that you want to do analysis on in your data warehouse, then there really is no implementation because you're basically just running reports off of the tables you have in your data warehouse. The other advantage is that you have one source of truth. You don't have to worry about sending data back and forth between your digital analytics product and your data warehouse, and you don't have to worry about the BI team is using one set of data. I'm sure many of you on this call have been in a situation where you say, well, my digital analytics product said that we had 1,000 leads today, but then your warehouse said that you had 1,200 leads, and then your BI tool is working off the warehouse, so they believe that you have 1,200 leads, and then you start arguing over data instead of using data. But in this case, everyone would be using the same data set instead of a separate data set that's in, say, a SaaS cloud provider. The other cool thing about this is that if you're building reports or if you're building cohorts of users, those can include all of the data. So if you want to build a cohort of people who did X, Y, and Z on the website, but they also did this in the store and they also did this in the call center, you can include all of that because it's all in the same system. You also potentially have cost savings because many of you, if you have a lot of volume, you might notice that when you send data to a SaaS provider like Adobe, Google, or Amplitude, you're paying for every event that you send. So if you have 10 million events today, well, they're charging you for every event. But if you just collect that and you send it directly to your data warehouse, and then you just do reports off the data warehouse, there can be huge cost savings. And a lot of the future might be tracking not based on event volume or hit volume, but it might be more just how many users are you tracking, like monthly tracked users, which can oftentimes save you money. And what's really cool is if you want to build a conversion funnel, you can build a conversion funnel that includes everything from campaign all the way through to them being a customer years down the road, because all of that data lives in that customer data warehouse. And then lastly, you have the ability to have a less restrictive data model because you don't have to worry about how many goals or events Google GA4 gives you. You can have as many as you want because you're basically just using your own data warehouse, and you don't have to worry about the constraints of an analytics vendor and their data model. You just do what you want to do. So really cool advantages if things move this direction. Now, what are some things you have to think about? Because, that sounds great, but you can't just snap your fingers. There's a bunch of considerations and things you have to think about. So if you want to play in the world of data warehouse native, obviously you have to have a data warehouse. So some smaller organizations aren't big enough to be able to afford a warehouse. Now, there are some vendors out there that are making it really easy where you could almost like rent a portion of like a Snowflake or a Redshift. So that hopefully will become easier and easier. But basically you have to have a data warehouse or this doesn't work. Obviously, you can only analyze data that exists in the warehouse. And one of the difficult parts of data warehouse native is that if there's a data point that you want to include in your analysis and it doesn't exist in the warehouse, you've got to get someone to get it in there for you. And that might be a dev resource or an engineering resource. And that might take a day, a week, a month, depending on how big your company is to actually get that new data in the warehouse. But the truth is, it probably takes the same amount of time to get that data into a digital analytics tool. It's just a matter of, do you want it in the warehouse or in the analytics tool? Now, the reporting response times might be a little bit slower for data warehouse native reports because they're crunching a lot of data and they're not 100% optimized like the SaaS vendors are. But I've seen some demos of data warehouse native, and in some cases, something that takes milliseconds in like an Adobe, Google, or Amplitude might take 10 seconds in a data warehouse native. But that will probably get faster and faster, thinking of kind of Moore's law over time. You probably aren't going to be able to do real-time use cases because it's going to take a little bit of time for the data to get from your source into the data warehouse. So it might push your times back a little bit if you're used to doing real-time data, but I generally am not a huge fan of doing real-time analysis anyway. The data warehouse naming taxonomy may be optimized for DBAs who use the warehouse. And so when you look at the events and properties that are in the warehouse, it may not have a friendly name that you're used to. So there's some work that I think data warehouse native tools are going to have to do to make it so that marketers and product teams can really understand the names of these elements, because sometimes if you've ever seen a data warehouse, the way that they name events and properties can be really complicated. And if you want to enable self-service, you need to make sure that people understand what they're looking at in the data warehouse. You might also still have to do some reverse ETL. There may be some MarTech vendors that you want to send subsets of data to. So you may need to be able to ship that out. But there are a huge number of data warehouse native MarTech vendors that are starting to emerge in the testing area, in the email area, the campaign area. And if they are already connected to the same warehouse that you have, then you don't have to worry about any reverse ETL. But if you're using something that's maybe a little older, that isn't in the data warehouse native for, say, your campaigns, you may still have to get some data out of the warehouse that today you would normally take maybe a feed from Adobe, Google, or Amplitude and send directly to, say, like a Braze days are iterable. But as those become data warehouse native, that will go away. And obviously, you still have to find a way to get data into your warehouse to begin with from your website or mobile app. And a lot of people use like a snowplow or a rudder stack, or you might have your own data collection tool. So again, some of the advantages, but also some of the things that you have to think about. Now, as I mentioned, a lot of vendors are starting to pop up in this space. The vendors who do data warehouse native are split out into different kind of point solutions that they offer. So since many of you are in the digital analytics space, the ones that I've been researching in digital analytics, there's a vendor called Qubit. There's another called NetSpring. Our company just got into this as well. If you're doing email, the one I hear talked about the most is MessageGears, but I've put the list of a couple other warehouse native email vendors there. When it comes to CDP or identity resolution, High Touch, RudderStack, a bunch of these names here, and a lot of them are new because this is a new area and they're names that maybe you're not familiar with, but you might want to check out because they're probably on the bleeding edge of this. When it comes to experimentation, EPO is one that I hear talked a lot about. And then when it comes to CRM, there's a couple that a friend of mine gave me. I haven't worked with these yet that are starting to become data warehouse native. So my goal today here is not to convince you that data warehouse native is the right answer or the wrong answer. I really just wanted to kind of share with you where this new technology that you might start hearing about. And I wanted to share what I've learned and kind of some of the pros and cons. But I always like to kind of leave people with a couple predictions and see if maybe I'm right about some of the things where things are going to go. So I believe that if we look 5 years out, I think that many organizations are going to consider this data warehouse model for analytics, but I think it's going to start primarily with the big organizations that have the most data, the most mature data teams. And I think mainly it's going to happen just for cost purposes. If you're a Disney, if you're a big company, you might say, listen, I'm spending millions of dollars a year on my SaaS analytics tool because I'm sending them so much data and I'm backing that data up in my data warehouse. If I could save some money, I'd like to save some money. People always start more financial than altruistic. I think that privacy and security is just going to get worse and worse over time. And I think more and more organizations are going to say, we want to minimize the amount of places we're putting our customer data. And even if the response times are a little slower, and even if it's a little clunkier, if we can skip sending data to a digital analytics provider, I'd rather just skip it altogether. It's one less place to get hacked, and it's one less item that I have to worry about with my privacy lawyer that checks off. I'd rather just have them run directly off of our warehouse where I've put a lot of effort and a lot of security to make sure that's there and that all my data is centralized. I do think that it may turn out that people use a hybrid model where they say for some data, we're going to use a data warehouse approach, but there's some data that maybe we want real time, or maybe it just lends itself more to maybe some marketing or product use cases that we want to put in a SaaS product. And maybe you do half and half. Maybe some of your more secure data goes into the data warehouse native, or maybe you just do a blended between data warehouse native and SaaS. But I think we might see that evolve as well. But I think that another crazy thing that could happen is that digital analytics could one day be absorbed into the data warehouse landscape. And instead of like today, the market being kind of a monopoly between, say, an Adobe Analytics or a Google Analytics, what if the future is that the number one analytics provider is Databricks or Snowflake, because that's where people are sending their data. And then there's tools that just allow you to do your analysis reports right off of that. So even though those vendors probably don't even know anything or care about the digital analytics space, as they start seeing all of the data come in, they might say, hey, what if we just build a reporting interface right on top of Snowflake, and then we will be a digital analytics provider as well. And I also think the data warehouse native could basically push the consolidation of digital analytics, BI, and CDP, which I already see happening, all coming together. And it may be that instead of in the future having a digital analytics vendor, a CDP vendor, and a BI vendor, maybe all of this is just one vendor. And it's basically just different ways to look at your customer data. So that's really all I wanted to share today, just to kind of share what I've learned, just maybe pique your interest a little bit. If you want to learn more about this, there's a couple resources that I want to give you. One of them is a really good blog post that kind of is like a 101 on data warehouse native in general. So I put a QR code here if you want to take a picture. I'll also share these slides, and that will take you to the blog post. And if you're more of a listener than a reader, which I totally respect because I am as well, there is a podcast that a friend of mine runs that are really short episodes, and he's gone pretty deep into data warehouse native in general, called Data Beats. And so it's really quick. Each episode is only like 10 minutes long. So you can check that out on Apple. I'm sure it's on all the podcasts. So you could take a look at that as well. And I put a QR code to that as well. So with that, we're going to take some questions. I was kind of curious to see what you guys thought of all this. Again, I don't care either way, but we have a second poll that we were going to fire up to see what you think after this. Are you intrigued and want to learn a little more? Do you think this could be the future? Or do you think all of this is full of crap and nothing's going to change the way it's been as for the last 20 years is the way it's going to be for the next 20 years? So if you can, fill out the survey here. I'm just curious to see what you think after being introduced, since many of you were new to this. And while you're doing that, please also throw in questions if you have questions for me.
Yeah, I'm seeing a few more people just waiting to join in, but I'll give it a few more seconds here to level out the results. But it's looking good. I mean, we're talking about, is this a fad or is this the future? So I guess we'll end the poll here, and we'll check it out. All right.
So I might want to move into sales because I got 70% to be intrigued. So that was my only goal. So I will consider that to be successful. And 26% of you say that this is the future. And we have only a couple who said, I don't buy it. So that's cool. That might be the case. You might be right. So really glad that came back. Again, hopeful that this was a learning session. So I'm going to tackle some of the questions that I got here. If there's other questions you want to chime in, please go ahead and I'll power through. Okay, so how do you envision the digital analytics team structure by using this approach? So good question. I think that this approach might actually change it. For many years, digital analysts were kind of in their own little world where they were, maybe a subset of the marketing group or the product group. But I think this is going to force everyone to work more with the data teams at the company and the team that owns the warehouse. And so I'm sure if you're in marketing analytics or product analytics, I'm sure you rarely talk to your warehouse team, but I have a feeling you're going to have to start taking them to lunch and starting to get to know them. And I think it's going to start to foster much more communication. So I think that's the team that ultimately the data team is going to be the one that would buy a data warehouse native solution, and they're going to just look for input from the digital analytics team. Next question. This is great, Adam. Qubit and NetSpring already do this. I know Amplitude mentioned they'd be doing this only on Snowflake, blah, 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 blah. I was told the data still needs to, okay. So basically what this question is about is there are a lot of data warehouses out there, and different vendors support different data warehouses. I think ultimately every vendor who wants to be in the data warehouse native analytics space is going to have to support every warehouse. I know at Amplitude, that's our plan. We've started with one, but again, other vendors can do a lot more right now. I think ultimately it will all kind of line up and we'll all be in the same place. But I think ultimately you have to just decide what is the data warehouse that you want to use as a company. I wouldn't make your analytics decision, choose your warehouse. I would choose your warehouse and then hope that your analytics provider builds upon that. Next question I've got here. wondering about the advanced features of products like GA and Adobe Analytics can be built with native analytics. So yeah, so that's a really big question. I can't speak for Google and Adobe anymore. I don't know if they have plans to support this type of technology. I think that what may happen in the future is vendors that insist that you send all of your data to them. I don't know if that will be the future. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. I know a lot of vendors have put a lot of effort into building their own kind of platform that you send the data into, but I think many organizations might feel more comfortable with a data warehouse being owned by the data team versus having their entire data warehouse outsourced to an Adobe or a Google. I know that like at Amplitude, what we want to do is we will let you store any data you want in Amplitude, but we will also let you store anything you want in your data warehouse and support that as well. So I think it's a big question for the digital analytics vendors. And if they don't go down this path, they could, would they be obsolete one day? I doubt it, but it's just something for them to consider. Who is a friend that I referenced, interested in following him? Arpit is friend Arpit Chowdhury. I'm not going to say the last name right, but I'll go back to his slide here for a second. So he's just an awesome guy in the analytics space. Chowdhury is the way I believe you pronounce his last name. But basically, I would just look him up on LinkedIn, follow him. He has a newsletter and he has this blog and podcast. Okay, next one. I 100% agree with the cost savings, but the lift to change how you collect data for large organizations is a giant cost. How do you see the trade-offs of the two? I agree that data is stored in too many different places, such as a SaaS tool, data warehouse, different market vendors. So I see the potential, but the amount of lift to change for large organizations. So good question, Chris. So I think what we're seeing is that the changeover shouldn't be that massive because most large organizations where it would be massive are already backing up all of their digital analytics data into the warehouse. So the warehouse should already have all of that data. And so if you get a data warehouse native solution on top of that, then technically you should be able to just at some point turn off the spigot to your SaaS vendor. And I would recommend that you do both in parallel for a while and just basically collect the data in SaaS and your warehouse and start using data warehouse native. And then once you're comfortable that everything is working, then you feel more comfortable turning off. But there really shouldn't be as much of a lift, assuming you have all the data that you need in the warehouse from your digital analytics vendor. And again, I'm thinking that this is going to be kind of a trend that happens over the next 2 to 5 years. I don't think this is something that's going to happen tomorrow, but I think it's something to plan for because a lot of companies are starting to make massive investments in infrastructure. So for example, I'll pick on Adobe for a second. You may be looking at making a large investment in the Adobe CDP platform. That could be a very expensive investment. And you just have to say to yourself, 5 years from now, if I believe data warehouse native is the answer, and I don't know if it is, but then you might say, do I want to go all in on, say, the Adobe platform, or would I rather go all in on my warehouse and hope that I can do my analysis off of the warehouse in the future for all the reasons we talked about? And Julie, let me know when we're at time. So am I good on time?
Doing great.
Okay, cool. We got a lot of questions coming. I'm doing my best. Okay, our current SaaS solution offers anomaly detection as a feature at near real time. Do data warehouse native vendors offer this? Great presentation. So yeah, I think that would be a big requirement for the data warehouse native solution. I think it probably wouldn't be as real time as you're getting today. Because a lot of times that data would have to go into the warehouse and then it would have to be processed. But I am sure that that would be on the roadmap of any data warehouse native vendor. And there may be other things that pop up. I could see like a vendor popping up that says, hey, as your data is going through on the way to the data warehouse, we might be able to help you with some anomaly detection as well. But I'm sure that will come. And again, I don't know how often you need like anomaly detection, like now. Even though we all love and think we have important jobs, we're not like doing brain surgery. So it's not like there's very few digital analytics emergencies in my experience, but I do think that would be something to push vendors on. Next question, how do you see this impacting the skill sets of digital analysts? Where should I look to upskill more data engineering skills? Good question. I do think that this does change the skills a little bit. I think that you're going to want to learn a lot more about data warehouses and data warehouse architecture. And I can speak for myself. I'm not the most technical person. And I always loved the fact that when I worked with a digital analytics vendor, I didn't have to build a data model. I didn't have to worry about all that. Tools like Snowplow, I have a huge respect for, because people who use Snowplow, they're literally building their own data model, and it's a really cool tool. But like a lot of that is just outsourced, and a lot of us who came from the marketing space, like we kind of fell into the digital analytics space, and we didn't really know data warehouses. Many of us now know SQL, but that's the extent of it. So I think learning more about data warehousing would definitely help in this world, because it'll help you just to be able to communicate with the data team that owns the warehouse, so that you can make progress towards the analytics goals that you have, if we end up in a situation where you're doing warehouse native off of that. And then Federico had a similar question. What should be the major skills that my team should have to deploy this solution? I mean, honestly, it's just knowing what data you want to collect, how to feed it into your warehouse, and how to do queries. So hopefully most of the data warehouse native are not going to require you to know SQL. It's just going to be point and click, just like we've all been used to. So next question, I think it's going to take another 3 to 5 years, but how do you see giants like Adobe and Google responding to this, especially with solutions? Okay, so I think I covered that one. Again, just last thing I'll say, I mean, those are great solutions. I just don't know that many large enterprises want to have Adobe or Google be their overall data warehouse. I think most people were comfortable with it being their marketing data warehouse, which is that subset I talked about in CDP. But I think that, again, the hard part of that is that it becomes more difficult to do segments and queries and funnels that take into account everything. And so I think that's why this data warehouse native might be kind of a different approach. And again, time will tell what happens. I'm really intrigued. I wish I could fast forward and see what is going to happen 5 years from now. But I do see that a number of companies that, like at Amplitude, that we've talked to about data warehouse native, has said, yeah, if this works, we're going to stop sending data to our CDPs, and we're going to stop sending data to our digital analytics providers, and we're going to just send our data to our warehouse, because they love it, they know it, they trust their warehouse. Which tag management vendor is best positioned to take advantage of data warehouse analytics or vendor agnostic tagging? Yeah, I think that honestly, Telium is always great. I think that Snowplow is probably the #1 vendor that I think is well positioned for this. But any analytics vendor that has SDKs, JavaScript, I know at Amplitude, we have like 20 different ways you can get data, and all of the data could go in, and then you could use that to send that data directly into the warehouse. I do worry that like the segments and mParticles of the world might be in a little bit of problem in the future. I mean, people could initially use them to send it to the warehouse, but I think eventually people are going to figure out that those are really expensive tools if you're just sending the data in, and they might just say, we're going to use open source, or we're going to build our own, or use Snowplow to do that. So I think Snowplow is probably the one that I see growing the most because of this. Okay. Oh man, keep coming. Do you see data warehouse native further incentivizing or accelerating the move to server-side tagging? I do think that could happen. I think because when you're basically sending the data in the warehouse anyway, it may not matter as much if you're doing client-side or server-side. So I think I'm not technical enough to fully answer that question, but I do see that could cause an uptick in server-side. But I think, again, more of that's going to be driven by the privacy and so on. Let's see what we have left. What do you see as the pros and cons of data warehouse analytics compared to the approach of, like, it says Adobe Customer Journey Analytics, but basically any package vendor? So I think we kind of covered that,
But I think if we go back to the pros and cons again, I think if I jump really back here, I think this is really the things that I would leave you with to think about. Is if you believe that you would benefit from all of these things, then that is your kind of pro list. And I think packaged solutions are going to be challenged to be able to do all of this that's on this slide, because it would just be super expensive to send all of that data to, say, like in Adobe, you know. But again, you never know, time will tell. Okay, so I think I've gotten through most of them, and I'm running out of breath. So I think I might just pause there, but I really appreciate all the questions. I wasn't sure if any of you were going to care about this topic, but seemed to be really engaged. So I'm really excited that hopefully you learned something, and hopefully you got something out of it.
Awesome. Yes. Thank you so much, Adam, for sharing your research that you've done yourself and in your own time. I think it's like a perfect conversation that we should all be having in the analytics community. So it's just really insightful, and, you know, only time will tell, but I mean, it's looking really great. So just thank you again for sharing your time with us. And thanks everybody for joining today's SDEC session. We will be having another one in August, so stay tuned for that. But just thank you again, Adam.
Okay. Thanks everyone for coming. Thanks so much, Julia.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.